Most people think their car is annoying because of how it drives, but a lot of that frustration is coming from settings you never touched after you drove it off the lot. Manufacturers turn on everything by default, even the stuff that nags you, fights your steering, or straight up makes the car feel worse in normal driving. This is Scott from CarLandTV, and today I'm breaking down 10 car features you should turn off or retune immediately, because once you fix these defaults, your car feels like a completely different machine. But first, do me a quick favor. Tap that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. It ain't required, but those clicks keep this thing rolling and make it easier for me to keep dropping solid car content straight to your screen. Now let's get back into it. Auto, start stop. Auto start stop shuts the engine off at a red light, then restarts it the instant you lift your foot. On paper, it saves fuel in city driving. AAA testing found about a 5% to 7% improvement in fuel economy when the system is enabled versus disabled on the same vehicles. Other technical testing shows the gain depends on how much of your route is idle time, so steady highway cruising barely benefits. Here's why I disable it most days. That restart event is a torque bump through the drivetrain, and some calibrations feel clunky with the AC loaded or when the engine is cold. It also makes low-speed creeping annoying because you're bouncing between off and go at walking speed. Automakers try to make it last with stronger starters, upgraded ring gears, and batteries built for frequent cycling like EFB or AGM, plus battery management that blocks shutdown when charge is low. Some newer setups use an integrated starter generator and electric vacuum or coolant pumps, so brakes and heat stay consistent, but cheaper systems can feel like they're cutting corners. If you want the savings without the aggravation, I only let it run when the light is clearly long and traffic is dead. Otherwise, switching it off keeps throttle response predictable and cabin comfort steadier. When you replace the battery, match the factory type, because the wrong one can confuse the charging strategy and shorten battery life. With the engine staying awake, it's also easier to judge steering assist behavior. Lane centering assist. Lane centering assist is the one that quietly grabs the wheel and tries to keep you perfectly in the middle, like your car is auditioning for a self-driving demo. Most of these systems are camera-based, watching lane lines and feeding tiny steering inputs non-stop. The problem is that lane lines in the real world are a mess. Fresh blacktop, glare, rain sheen, patched asphalt, old paint, construction tape, exit splits, weird merges. The camera sees a suggestion, then your steering gets a suggestion back. Cool. On a clean interstate, it can feel smooth. In the places people actually drive, it can start doing that annoying micro-correction thing that makes the wheel feel twitchy, or it tries to center you between lines that are wrong or fading. That's where I shut it off, because I want my inputs to be the final answer, not a group project. Systems like this are still considered driver assist, meaning the driver is supposed to stay fully engaged and continuously monitor the road, even when the car is helping with steering. And the industry is still uneven on safeguards against misuse and driver inattention, which tells you everything about how much trust to place in it. I'm not anti-assist. Lane keeping assist and lane departure warning can actually reduce road departure crashes. And NHTSA research has estimated LKA-equipped models were less likely to be in fatal single-vehicle road departure crashes, with a 24% estimate and a wide confidence interval. So the move is simple. I'll keep the warning and the gentle nudge, but I ditch the constant centering torque when the road markings get sketchy. Once the wheel stops helping, it's easier to spot the other lane feature that loves stepping in at the worst possible time. Steering intervention, lane departure, road departure mitigation, and lane departure prevention are the lane features that do more than beep. They add steering torque when the camera thinks you're crossing a line or drifting toward the shoulder. Most of them use lane edge detection and a time-to-line crossing threshold. Then the electric power steering motor applies a corrective input. So the same hardware that makes parking lot steering easy is now correcting you at 65. The problem is that the system cannot read intent. If I slide over to dodge a pothole, give a cyclist space, or thread a narrow construction lane, it can tug back. Bad paint, glare, rain sheen, or old markings make it worse because the camera can lock onto the wrong edge. Some setups also get weird near exits or split lanes and try to center you away from the path you chose. That fight at the wheel is a distraction. There is evidence that these systems can help in the crash type they target. NHTSA research has estimated that lane keeping assist is associated with fewer road departure crashes, meaning it can catch unintended drifts. That's why I don't shut off every lane feature. My move is to disable the steering intervention and keep the warning. The menu is usually split into lane departure warning versus lane departure prevention, road departure mitigation, or steering assist. I'll take a chime, a wheel vibration, an icon. I just want my hands to be the final vote. With the wheel drama gone, the cabin starts revealing what's annoying. Rear seat reminder. A rear seat reminder sounds wholesome until it starts nagging me for a gym bag. Most versions are not a sensor that detects a kid. They are usually a door sequence logic trigger. On many GM vehicles, it arms if you open and close a second row door within about 10 minutes before starting, or if a rear door is used while driving. When you shut the car off, it throws a check rear seat message even when the back seat is empty. Nissan's rear door alert follows the same playbook. If a rear door is opened before a trip, and you park and walk away without reopening a rear door, the car reminds you on the cluster and may add horn chirps. Great for the one scenario it was built for. Annoying when it goes off because you loaded groceries earlier and already forgot. Some systems are more legit because they look for motion. Hyundai's rear occupant alert uses ultrasonic sensors aimed at the rear seating area and can warn after you exit if it detects movement, closer to real child presence detection, but false triggers can happen from airflow or item shifting. So I disable the basic door logic reminder because constant false alarms train me to ignore alerts. If the car offers true rear occupant sensing, that stays on while the door logic gets cut. I'd rather get one warning that matters, not 10 today. With the back seat quiet, the dash still has other nanny warnings itching to chirp. Speed limit warning and speed limiter. The speed limit warning goes active the moment the system decides it knows better than the driver. I notice it most when I am pacing traffic, and the dash lights up like I screwed up. The logic is simple but unforgiving. A forward camera flags a sign, the navigation database supplies a stored limit, and the software applies a confidence score. When either source is wrong, the alert still fires because the system is designed to err on the side of warning, not accuracy. That design choice matters. Traffic sign recognition struggles with angled signs, weather glare, dirt on the windshield, and lane association when frontage roads run next to highways. Map data can be months behind local changes. Regulators openly acknowledge this margin of error, especially in regions where intelligent speed assistance is mandated and must default to on at startup. So when the car chirps at me in a temporary work zone that ended 2 weeks ago, that is not a glitch. That is expected behavior. I shut off the audible warning because repeated false alerts train bad habits. Drivers stop reacting. The visual speed limit display stays on because it helps situational awareness without yelling. Some cars let you set a tolerance, like 5 or 10 over. That stays maxed out if disabling the sound is not an option. Speed limiters play by different rules. They cap torque requests once a set speed is reached and usually allows a hard override through kickdown. That predictability makes it useful in very specific scenarios. Urban driving, merging, and passing demand immediate throttle, so the limiter stays off there. On long, tightly enforced stretches, it earns its keep. After the car stops policing speed, it usually pivots toward policing attention, and that is where the conversation shifts from annoying to intrusive. Driver attention monitoring. Eyes on the road sounds simple until a camera decides your face is doing something suspicious. Driver attention monitoring is usually an infrared cabin camera aimed straight at the driver, watching gaze angle, blink rate, head position, and how long your eyes wander. Some brands still use steering behavior as a proxy, but most newer systems have gone visual because regulators and safety groups pushed for it on hands-free assist systems. The tech itself works. The calibration is the problem. I get flagged wearing polarized sunglasses. I get flagged at night. I get flagged when I check mirrors too often. I get flagged when I tilt my head instead of moving my eyes. That is not me being reckless. That is the algorithm losing confidence. When confidence drops, the system escalates. First, a visual warning, then an audio chime. Then it starts threatening to disable cruise or steering assist. That escalation ladder is intentional because Level 2 driver assist still legally requires full supervision. The car has to prove it tried to keep me engaged. Here's where it crosses the line for daily driving. False positives train bad reactions. When a system nags during normal, correct behavior, people tune it out. NHTSA has acknowledged that attention monitoring is still evolving and that driver annoyance and misuse are active challenges, especially as automakers rush features into production to meet guidance and ratings. That lines up with real-world experience, so I dial it back or shut it off when the car allows. Sensitivity down, audible alerts gone, visual reminder only, if that. If the monitoring is hard linked to a hands-free highway system I actually use, I tolerate it and make it behave by cleaning the lens area and adjusting seating. If it is just there to chirp while I drive like a normal adult, it gets disabled. Auto high beam. Auto high beams are supposed to do one job: give me forward light on dark roads, then dip fast when it spots other traffic. Most systems use a forward camera or photometric sensor to detect headlamps, tail lamps, and street lighting, and then the body control module switches between low and high beams. Some cars will not arm it until you're above a minimum speed, and the headlights are set to auto, because engineers know people love surprises. Here's why I shut it off a lot. The camera sits behind the windshield, so grime, frost, heavy rain, fog, and snow mess with detection. Owner manuals warn that dirty glass and weather can limit performance, meaning the car might dim late or refuse high beams when the road is empty. Add hills, curves, and reflective signs, and you get the classic move where the car flashes high beams, drops them, then flashes again. And no, your tint strip does not help the camera see. Congrats, now you look like the annoying guy. I keep it disabled in bad weather, in traffic, and anywhere with frequent oncoming cars. Manual high beams are boring, but predictable. If I leave it on, I clean the windshield area in front of the camera, and I make sure the headlights are aimed correctly, because misaimed LEDs plus auto high beam is how you become everyone's villain fast today. Tuning the lighting is also a good time to talk about that other automatic feature that loves acting possessed: rain-sensing wipers. Traffic sign recognition. Traffic sign recognition is the feature that reads road signs with the forward camera, then displays the speed limit or a warning icon on the cluster. Some cars fuse the camera read with map data, then decide what to show based on confidence scoring. Sounds clean, until you're on a service road next to a freeway and the car grabs the freeway limit, or it sees a temporary construction sign from last month and treats it like gospel. False reads happen for dumb reasons. Glare, rain sheen, a splattered windshield, or a truck blocking half the numbers can throw the classifier off. Variable speed zones and school zones are worse because the sign might be correct only during certain hours, and the car usually can't interpret the time window. The result is a dashboard that keeps constantly telling me I'm speeding when I'm not. Or worse, it shows a higher limit than reality. I keep the display turned off if the car won't stop nagging about it. If the menu lets me keep the icon but mute alerts, I take that route. And I never let sign recognition auto-set cruise speed. Some systems can link detected limits to adaptive cruise, which is how you end up braking for a misread sign or creeping along at the wrong speed while everyone blows by. Cutting that noise makes the cabin calmer, which is perfect, because the next feature loves pumping fake sound through the speakers, as I asked for a cosplay exhaust. Active sound design. Active sound design, engine sound enhancement, sound actor, whatever your brand calls it. This is the fake exhaust feature that pipes extra engine noise into the cabin. Sometimes it's straight through the stereo speakers using the car's amplifier and a dedicated sound processor. Other times, it's a separate actuator speaker mounted in the car, like the Volkswagen Group's setup that literally adds noise through a speaker on the firewall. Either way, the inputs are real vehicle data, like RPM, throttle position, load, and sometimes drive mode. Then the system generates or boosts certain frequencies so the car feels sportier. Here's why it gets shut off on my stuff. It messes with the actual soundscape you use to drive. The natural cues are already there: engine note, road noise, tire pitch, wind. When the car starts overlaying a synthetic track on top, it can exaggerate drone, make the cabin sound boomy, and even interfere with audio upgrades. Aftermarket installers have been calling this out for years because active noise control and sound enhancement can inject low-frequency tones that show up as weird rumble or inconsistent bass when you add amps or subs. The car is basically fighting your sound system, then acting innocent. If I want more sound, I'll use a real intake, a real exhaust, or I'll just roll the window down like a normal human. The software version feels like paying for a steak and getting a beef-scented candle. Go into audio settings, vehicle settings, or drive mode sound, and kill active sound or set it to minimal if the car won't fully disable it. Less fake noise in the cabin makes it easier to notice the feature that matters way more than sound, the one quietly sending your driving data somewhere you never agreed to. Connected Services Data Sharing. Connected Services Data Sharing is the one I kill first because it's the feature that keeps working even when the trial runs out. The car has a cellular modem, GPS, and a pile of logs already sitting on the CAN bus. Trip starts, trip ends, speed events, hard braking, time of day, location pings, diagnostic codes, all that can be packaged and shipped through the automaker's backend the second you tap I agree, on a screen you barely read at the dealership. Recently, the FTC finalized an order against GM and OnStar in January 2026 over collecting and selling drivers' precise location and driving behavior data without valid consent, including a 5-year ban on disclosing that data to consumer reporting agencies and long-term requirements around affirmative consent and controls. That's not a small oops. That's the government saying, out loud, this stuff got abused. So my rule is simple. Emergency SOS can stay. Crash notification can stay. Remote unlock, remote start, and stolen vehicle assist. Those can stay if I actually use them. Everything labeled vehicle data sharing, driving data, usage-based insurance, smart driver, analytics, research, marketing, personalization, third-party partners, diagnostics upload, gets turned off. If there's a separate toggle inside the phone app and another in the head unit, both get hit, because some brands treat those like separate consents. The funniest part is how cheap this data can be when it gets brokered, yet it can still feed insurance scoring pipelines. Turning it off is basically refusing to tip someone for spying.